Hello everyone and welcome back to Beatley Tone's Beatles channel. Lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining me for this video and I hope you're all doing well. Now in today's video I'm going to attempt to rank George Harrison's solo albums from worst to best. Now I'm sure you all watch lots of other Beatles YouTubers and you've probably seen lots of George Harrison ranking videos, so I'm a little bit late to the party, but you know the channel is only 18 months old, but I have finally got round to attempting this. Some of you might think I'm kind of treading water because I'm tackling a fairly small catalogue and avoiding those big solo catalogues. I'm talking about Ringo's albums and Paul's albums, which are both quite huge catalogues to rank, and in some respects you'd be right. I am treading water a little bit. So I started with John's, which was the smallest. Now going on to George's. I'll probably do Ringo's next, and then Paul's. But so that's what I'm gonna do in today's video. Now I am a little bit late to the party because probably the best sort of time to have done this would have been around George's 80th birthday. A couple of my friends, YouTuber friends, Beatle Dave from Derby, he did his a few weeks ago, and my friend Beatle Dustino, he did his ranking video of George's solo stuff, and he drops it actually on George's 80th birthday, which was very well organised and very clever of him. So do check out their two videos on George's solo albums, and we'll see how mine compare with theirs. Now, a couple of sort of caveats about this ranking video. I'm not going to include any live albums, so no live in Japan, no concert for Bangladesh. Now, I did sort of have a little bit of a dilemma about whether or not to include the Travelling Wilburys albums in this ranking video, and my initial instinct was not to include them with the George's solo albums. And Mrs. Beatley Tone, she said to me, well, if you were doing Paul's ranking videos, you'd include Wings in that, to which I said, yes, I would, Mrs. Beatley Tone. And she said, well, what's the difference? What's the difference? Because Wings is just Paul in a band and the Travelling Wilburys are George in a band. So what is the difference? And I suppose to some extent she had a point. But I think the difference for me is that with Wings, Paul is the dominant character in that band. He writes most of the songs and he sings lead vocal on most of the songs. And I just feel with the Travelling Wilburys, George isn't dominating enough vocally on those two albums to warrant that being sort of mingled in with his pucker solo albums. However, I will be including the two Travelling Wilburys albums in my deep dive series, my deep dive review series, where I do the deep dives on each of the albums and then rank them and throw them into a great big table with all the Beatles albums, John solo, Paul solo, George's solo and Ringo's solo. So I will be doing the Travelling Wilburys as part of that series, but I'm not going to include it in this video. I'm also not going to include electronic sounds in the same way as when I did John's solo album ranking a few weeks ago. I didn't include the Unfinished Music albums and the Wedding album because they're not proper music. Electronic sound is the same sort of thing. You know, there was just no point in including it because I'd hold it up. I'd say this is absolute shite. It's unlistenable. It's terrible, and it's come last. So there's no point, and I've just said it anyway now. So I'm just going to rank the musics, the albums that have got like proper music on it. So there are 11 George Harrison albums to rank. So let's get on with it. So always with these ranking videos, something has to come bottom of the pile. For me, it's this album, Wonderwall Music from 1968, George's first solo album and the first album to come out on the Apple label. Didn't really get off to a good start, but that was to change fairly quickly. Now, this is a soundtrack album, the soundtrack to the film Wonderwall, and should be kind of judged as such. It's an instrumental album. There's no singing on it. There's a little bit of Indian singing on it, but there's no Western singing or no pop singing, if you like. And you know, it's reasonable. It's a reasonable train of thought to not even really count this as a George Harrison solo album, because he doesn't sing on it. He plays a few guitar and keyboard overdubs on it, but hasn't really got much to do with the playing of the album. I say a lot of the Western instrumentals are played by the band, the Remo 4, who are a Liverpool band, and there is a track that's played called Skiing, which is Eric Clapton and Ringo Starr, and probably that's about it. A lot of the music was recorded in the Bombay sessions that also produced The Inner Light, which is a great song. It's not that I don't like Indian music, I do, but I kind of like Indian music with vocals, and there's not much of that here. The opening track here, Microbes, which is played on an instrument called the Shanai, which is a kind of an oboe type instrument. To me, just sounds like someone farting for 3.5 minutes. It's dreadful. A lot of the tracks on side 2 are very short, under 2 minutes, and I kind of wish that the tracks on side 1 were also under 2 minutes. I have seen some YouTubers who have done these George Harrison solo album rankings not rank this bottom of the pile. I've seen them the sort of low to middle range. This album has come in for some reviewers, and they found stuff on this album to enjoy. I'm afraid for me, there is nothing really to enjoy on this album, and I can say with some sort of degree of confidence that I probably won't ever play this album again. I can't ever imagine there being a time when I'm thinking, I really fancy listening to Wonderwall music. So for me, at number 11, it is Wonderwall Music. It's bottom of the pile. So my number 10 is Extra Texture. Read all about it, from 1975. We just talked about Wonderwall, which was the first album on the Apple label. This was the last album on the Apple label, and the album's got a funny sort of history to it, because George booked sessions in LA, recording sessions to record the band Splinter, who he'd recently signed to his newly formed Dark Horse label, and for some reason they couldn't make the sessions, or they didn't turn up or whatever. So George decided to keep the sessions and record his own album. Now, he didn't really have enough songs ready to record his own album, so he had to rely on a few leftover tracks from previous albums to make up the numbers, and I'll come to those in a minute. But generally, this album, for me, it lacks choruses, it lacks a good hook in any of the songs, a very miserable feel to it. George's vocals are very thin and weedy and buried deep in the mix, and it's not a pleasant experience. The opening track, You, was a leftover song from the All Things Must Pass sessions. He recorded it again in 1971 with a lot of the musicians that played on All Things Must Pass, people like Jim Gordon and Carl Radle and Gary Wright, but he did some overdubs on it for this album in LA. He got Jim Keltner in to overdub some drum parts. He did some guitar parts, and Leon Russell, I think, is on it as well, doing some piano parts. And it's an okay song, but it's very repetitive. But it is one of only 2 upbeat songs on the album. It's not a terrible song, but it's not a great song either. The other song, His Name Is Legs, which closes the album, is the second sort of upbeat song. And again, this is left over from another album, Dark Horse, and I can kind of see why it was left off of that album. That song does absolutely nothing for me at all. The Answers at the end is like many of the songs on this album, is a piano-led ballad, which could have been quite nice, but it goes on way too long. It sort of clocks in at 5.5 minutes and doesn't really go anywhere. This Guitar Can't Keep From Crying, of course, is part 2 of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and is the only song on this album really that features George's trademark slide guitar solo. Again, it's not a bad song, but if you've got the Apple Years or the 2014 remastered CD of this album, there is a much better version of this song on that album. Ooh Baby, You Know I Love You is a kind of tribute to Smokey Robinson. Musically, it sounds almost identical to Pure Smokey, another tribute to Smokey Robinson that's on 33 1/3, which I'll come to later. World of Stone is just depressing, really. Side 2 opens with another bit of You, which is exactly what it says, another bit of You. Track 1, which wasn't on track 1. It's got the sort of sax solo that was added by Jim Horn during these sessions on it. Tired of Midnight Blue is probably, for me, the best track on this album. I do like this track, but when I did my top 50 George Harrison songs videos, no songs from this album made that list. If you want to watch that video, you can find it on the channel. Grey Cloudy Lies is probably the most depressing song I've ever heard. The lyrics are very, very depressing, verging on suicidal. Musically, the intro is kind of stolen from Billy Preston's That's the Way God Planned It, and there are even some piano flourishes from Hey Jude, if you don't mind, on it as well. But the lyrics are just so depressing, and that's a kind of feel that you get from the whole album. The song This Guitar Can't Keep From Crying opens with the lines, found myself out on a limb, I'm happier than I've ever been. Well, George, you need to tell the rest of this album that you're happier than you've ever been, because it doesn't come through on this album. It's the exact opposite, if you like. Apparently the sessions were very sort of cocaine filled, so much so that Klaus Voormann, who plays on a couple of tracks, left the sessions because it was not a good scene, according to him. So that's my general thoughts of Extra Texture. Look, I've had this album since 1977, and Lord knows that I've tried to find a way to love this album. I've tried and I've tried and I've tried, and I just can't. I just can't connect with this album at all. So this is my number 10. So for number 9 on my ranking video, I'm moving into the 1980s, and this album from 1982, Gone Troppo. Now, by the time we got to 1982, I think pop music was probably 4th on George's priority list of ways in how he liked to spend his time, coming a poor 4th to things like watching Formula One racing, doing his garden, and producing films for his company. Handmade pop music was probably next on the list, and it kind of shows on this album. It feels like an album that George is disinterested in. He didn't bother doing any promotion for this album. The two singles from it, Wake Up My Love and Dream Away, didn't bother making a video for either of those songs, and consequently by not promoting this album, it has really poor chart performance in the UK. It got as far as number 108 on the UK album charts, and in America, who traditionally have been much kinder to George's solo work than we have here in the UK, it became George's first solo album not to make the top 20 of the Billboard charts. Now, the album sort of starts off with Wake Up My Love, 1982. The synthesizer is king, and this is a very synthesizer heavy song, but it is a good song nonetheless. It was the lead off single. The next track, That's the Way It Goes, is also very synth heavy, but again, it's a good track that I like a lot. I do really love I Really Love You, even though it's a cover, even though George really only sings backing vocals on it. It's a kind of a 50s pastiche, but it is an enjoyable song. Now, for me, I'm not really a fan of instrumentals, but the track Grease, which is fourth on this album, is a pretty nice laid back instrumental with some fantastic guitar work from George. So again, it's a track that I like, and I really like the title track, Gone Troppo, as well. Again, it's kind of got this laid back feel. It's got wit in its lyrics, and I do like it. But I really do think that Gone Troppo as an album is an album of two halves. The first side being really good, the second side, tailing off pretty sharply. Mystical One is okay, but no great shakes. I really like Unknown Delight, probably the best song on side 2 of this album. Baby Don't Run Away, it does absolutely nothing for me, and Dream Away has got a hook, but I really don't like it. I really don't like that, Ura in my or whatever it is that he sings in that chorus. It drives me absolutely bananas. I don't like it at all. And the final song, Circles, which was a song that George tried out for the White Album, is here in its completed form at long last, and I think that is a really good track. You can hear an early version of Circles on the Easter demos of the White Album 2018 box. So for me, as I say, it's a record of two halves. It's number 9 on my ranking. It's Gone Troppo from 1982. So for number 8 on my ranking, I'm sticking with the 1980s. This album from 1981, Somewhere in England, which I think is a much better album than it's ever given credit for. Just my opinion. It's got a bit of a checkered history, this album. You may know that the album that was originally delivered to Warner Brothers at the back end of 1980, they rejected the album. They wanted something more poppy, more upbeat, more commercial. So 4 tracks were lost from the album, Sat Singing, Tears of the World, Flying Hour and Lay His Head. I think 2 of those songs, Tears of the World and Sat Singing, are both really good songs with great guitar work from George on it. Whether they would have improved the album, bearing in mind the 3 songs that were added, which was Blood from a Clone all those years ago and Teardrops, I'm not so sure. I think probably the right decision was made, but George fans will argue till they're blue in the face which would be the better format for this album. Now, the album kicks off with one of those songs, Blood from a Clone, and I really like the idea that George has kicked off this album with a song slagging off his record company after they've rejected his album, and one of the songs they've delivered it instead is a song slagging them off. Now, I've always really liked Blood from a Clone. It's quite an enjoyable song, but I've always felt that it kind of needed beefing up a little bit because it's quite a bitter song. Well, it is a bitter song, and it probably could do with a more robust arrangement musically. Unconsciousness Rules, which is the second track, is another great upbeat song. I like that one a lot. And track 3, Life Itself, absolutely beautiful ballad, one of George's best. I think this is probably the best track on the album. Great song. Now track 4 is the song that really sold the album for George all those years ago. It got to number 11 in the UK chart, but originally this was recorded in 1980 before John died, and it was a song that was written for Ringo for his Stop and Smell the Roses album, and it was recorded, but Ringo felt that the key was a little bit too high for him, but it was recorded, and Ringo's original drum track from that recording back in November 1980 was kept for the revamped all those years ago. Obviously, when John was killed, George changed the lyrics to make the song reflect what happened, and brought in Denny and Paul and Linda to sing backing vocals on it. A great track. I've always felt that was a great track, and a track that I felt that when it came out as a single in April 1981, it was something that we needed as fans, someone to say something positive about John after what had happened. Now, the final track on side 1 is one of 2 Hoagie Carmichael covers, which is unusual to have 2 covers from the same writer on the album, but both of them are really great tracks. Usually I would prefer a song written by George on his albums, but both of these tracks are worth their place on the album. I enjoy both of them a lot. Side 2 opens with another one of the songs that was brought in to replace the 4 that were kicked out, and that is Teardrops, another really great upbeat song with a really good hook. I like that track a lot. That Which I've Lost is completely lost on me. Not a great song at all. Writing on the Wall is nice. It's delicate. I think it was the B-side of all those years ago, and it's probably a little bit better than a B-side for me. The album closes with Save the World, where George is is one of the first pop stars to sort of write a song about the environment and that sort of thing. Another good song. So this is an album that I like a lot. I think the best track is Life Itself. I think the worst track is That Which I Have Lost. So at number 8, it's Somewhere in England. So at number 7, I'm going for Living in the Material World from 1973. Now, when this album came out, expectation was sky high. George was riding high on the success of All Things Must Pass. He was riding high on the success of the concert for Bangladesh. And I think that what was delivered versus the expectation kind of led to, some fairly harsh reviews for this album, but make no doubt about it, there's plenty on this album to really love. The opening track, Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth, was obviously a very big hit. I think number 1 in America, number 5 in the UK. Really upbeat song with a positive message. It's got 3 guitar solos, no less, in it. Just really great track that never gets old for me. Track 2, Sue Me, Sue You, blues with a title like that. It promises 2 things. 1, to be a blues song. 2, to be a song about getting sued, and it delivers on both promises. A very bitter song, an angry song, a song obviously about the Beatles court cases that were going on at the time, but again, a very strong song. Track 3 raises the bar even further. The light that has lighted the world, an absolutely fantastic piano-led ballad. Nicky Hopkins on piano on this. Really, really gorgeous ballad. Probably my favourite track on the album. Really, really good. The next track, Don't Let Me Wait Too Long, is so catchy. You could be mistaken for thinking that it had been written by Paul McCartney. Musically, very, very hooky, but lyrically, it lacks a little bit. There's only one verse and one chorus, and they just kind of get repeated over and over again. But it's still more than decent track. Who Can See It is the sort of the first of three sort of fairly slow ballads on this album, and again, it's a very delicate song. It's kind of a song that sort of revels in the people who can now accept George for who he is, this sort of spiritual being rather than Beatle George, and sort of celebrating those people in George's eyes. The side ends with Living in the Material World, the title track. Again, probably this is about as rock as this album gets, but it's got that lovely sort of Indian sequence in the middle, and the rock into the Indian, and from the Indian back into the rock kind of segues together perfectly. But brilliant song. Really upbeat and a fun song. Of course, it's got that the reference to the three other Beatles in there. Found my friends here in the material world, John and Paul here in the material world. Although we started out quite poor, we got Richie on a tour, and just to ram the point home, Ringo does a typical Ringo feel. Great song, great way to end side one. Now side two opens with The Lord Loves the One that loves the Lord, and this is where the album gets a little bit preachy, a little bit sanctimonious, and this is what gets people's backs up. Musically, this song again is very catchy, very hooky, but the lyrics it's an absolute stinker lyrics wise as far as I'm concerned. Talking about karma, the Lord says if you don't give, then you don't get loving. That doesn't sound too Christian to me. The next track, Be Here Now, a very slow ballad, and I kind of appreciate it as this sort of beautiful ballad, but it takes so long to get going, if it ever gets going at all. It's not one of my favourites on the album, but I do appreciate it as a delicate ballad. Now, the next track, Try Some, Buy Some, was a song that was written for Ronnie Spector, a song that kind of looks at two stances over drugs. One where he's talking about his friends in the music business that have died because of drug addiction, and then on the other hand he's saying that when he was using drugs, it enabled him to see God and understand God and gave him his sort of spirituality. So an interesting song from that point of view. The penultimate song on the album is The Day the World Gets Round, another sort of delicate ballad, one that I like a lot. And the album ends with That Is All, which is another sort of really sort of slow, sort of sparse ballad, but with a fantastic guitar solo from George in the middle. This is an album that I have done a deep dive review on, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts on this album, please check out that video on my channel. When I did that deep dive review, I kind of got much more from this album just by listening to that album over and over again while I was doing that deep dive review than I had on the previous 40 years that I'd owned the album. So my number 7 is Living in the Material World. So number 6 is Dark Horse from 1974. Now I know that's going to surprise some people that it's ranked so highly in this chart. It's probably surprised myself a little bit, but I've just always had a really soft spot for this album. I think it's because it was the first George Harrison solo album I ever bought. I don't know why I went for this one first. It was probably cheap or something like that, and I'm sure when I come to do the deep dive review of this album and mark these songs out of 10, I'm sure it's going to come up with a lower score than Living in the Material World, so I can't justify putting it any higher, putting it higher than Living in the Material World, apart from the fact that I've just always had a soft spot for the album. Now obviously the album is not without its problems, mainly the fact that George had laryngitis when he recorded some of the songs, so his voice isn't the best on some of the songs, but you know, it's just an album that I really love, and I'm not trying to be clever or different by putting it so high. It's just, as I say, I've got a soft spot for it and I want to give it some love. So the album sort of kicks off with Harry's On Tour Express, the opening track. Now I've already said I'm not a big fan of instrumental songs, but this one is an absolute belter. I think I do really like this one, despite it being devoid of words. Obviously George had the 1974 US tour in mind when he put this song together as an opening song for both the album and the tour. Now the next track, Simply Shady, is simply my favourite song on the album. This is one of those songs where George's voice is not up to scratch because of his illness, and it's a song that kind of looks at the contradictions in his life. On one side you've got the kind of the sex and drugs and rock and roll and cocaine fueled lifestyle that George was living after his marriage broke up, and how that conflicts with the spiritual George, the preachy George, the sanctimonious George that we kind of saw on some of the songs on Living in the Material World. But despite everything, some fantastic guitar playing on this song, and I just really love this song. Next up is So Sad, a beautiful ballad, a very underrated song. This song doesn't get enough credit for me as far as I'm concerned. I really love So Sad. The next song, again, Bye Bye Love, the cover of the Everly Brothers song. Again, a song that most fans absolutely detest. He changes the lyrics, he drastically changes the arrangement, but I think the arrangement on this is really good, and I really like the fact that he adds a little bit of humour to it by applying his own Bye Bye Love story. There goes our lady with someone new, I hope they're happy, and clap her too, or something like that. Bye Bye Love, again, a song that I really like on this album. My Love, the closing song on side one, is a little bit hit and miss for me. I don't hate it, I don't love it, it's somewhere in the middle. Side 2 opens with Ding Dong Ding Dong, a single from the album that did absolutely nothing as a single. Very catchy, very hooky, but sort of nonsense lyrics, repetitive lyrics. Not one of his finer moments, I don't think, but a good sort of New Year's song nonetheless. Next up is the title track, Dark Horse, and I'm sure that this song would get a lot more credence if George's voice was better on this. He is suffering with laryngitis when he recorded this, but it is a sort of, you know, a kind of up-tempo, folky ballad with great lyrics. Again, a song that I really like. You know, I'm a dark horse running on a dark race course. The next song, Far East Man, a song co-written with Ronnie Wood. Again, another great song that gets totally overlooked. I feel a really good song. And if you want to hear Ron Wood's version of this song, you can find it on his album I've Got My Own Album to Do, and it's great. The album closes with a spiritual song. It is he, Jai Sri Krishna. Again, this is a sort of, a Krishna chanting sort of song. Again, really, really catchy. But again, the lyrics are repetitive, and it goes on far too long. But that's Dark Horse for me. As I say, I've got a soft spot for it. So it is my number 6. Because we're heading towards the half-hour mark on this video, and I don't really want the video to go on for an hour. I've still got 5 albums to rank and talk about. I don't want to skimp over them. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the line here and hang the top 5 albums over into a part 2 of this video, which will drop in a couple of days. It won't take me very long to do the top 5, and I want to keep the momentum up, so it'll be with you in a couple of days. In the meantime, if you want to tell me down in the comments what you think of numbers 11 to 6, maybe give me your 11 to 6. Tell me whether you agree with my rankings or disagree with my rankings. Whatever you want to tell me about this video, about George's solo albums, please do so down in the comments. But don't tell me your top 5 just yet. We'll keep that. We'll hang that over to the part 2 of this video, and you can tell me your top 5 in the comments on that video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to do me a huge favor, please give the video a thumbs up and hit the like button. That helps with the YouTube algorithms, helps my videos get out there to more people. If you're seeing this channel for the first time, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you on board and get you involved with the channel. That would be absolutely great. Okay, so that is it for part 1. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As I say, part 2 will be along in a couple of days, and I will see you then. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.